Bah. On a sunny and beautiful, although it's still too darn hot, but soon enough in Cleveland it'll be freezing cold, so I'm not going to complain about the heat, even though I already did. It's been muggy. It's been a muggy summer, but I'll take summer over winter anytime. But the fall is the best right here in the bullpen, courtesy of Bet Rivers. Starting next week, we go to our fall schedule. I'll be on every Sunday after the Browns game. I will be on, instead of being on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, I'll be on Sundays, Tuesdays, and Thursdays, working on some other things too, so stick around for that. Check out the Bet Rivers app if you're not using it already for all your gambling needs, from the NFL to college to tennis to baseball. Another parlay out tomorrow, although I have to admit my parlays have not been great lately. I got to get my shit together. So I could do better, but we'll keep working on it. A lot to get to on today's live show. Of course, if you have a question or a comment, jump in the YouTube chat, post it there, and I will respond to your comment or question in just a little bit. Later in the show, did the Guardians get a season-saving win yesterday, or is that hyperbole on my part? But we begin with the Browns. 1 week from today is opening day in the NFL, the Chiefs and the Ravens. 10 days from now, opening day for most of the other teams in the NFL, including the Browns, when they will host the Dallas Cowboys. Spoke with a guy who does a Cowboys podcast earlier today, and he actually thinks the Browns are going to win a low-scoring game. We'll get more into what we expect from the game obviously next week in diving specifically into that one. But still here, with 10 days to go before the season, the Browns and every other team are still working on some final touches to the roster. When I was with you yesterday, we talked about the fact that they kept 4 quarterbacks on the roster, that they cut D'Onta Foreman and only had 2 running backs on the roster. I said that I wouldn't be surprised in the next 24 hours if that quickly changed. And that's exactly what has happened. The Browns kept Tyler Huntley, hoping they could entice some team to at least give up a late draft pick for him. That did not materialize. You saw a couple of other quarterbacks of his ilk get traded for 7th-round picks in the last couple of days. Obviously, teams that were looking for that, maybe backup or certainly third quarterback were more interested in other guys, including Taylor Heineke, who got traded. Ultimately, the Browns could not find a buyer for Tyler Huntley, and so today they did what we knew, I figured that at some point they would do: take 1 quarterback off the roster and add 1 running back on. That's exactly what happened, and it's the guys you expected. No new additions here. Huntley officially cut. And I shouldn't say D'Onta Foreman, I guess technically is a new addition, but he was already here. They cut him. They bring him back a day later. I'm sure that the Browns and D'Onta Foreman had worked something out behind the scenes that he wasn't going to, end up on another team. Because D'Onta Foreman is a vested veteran, it's not a situation where he ends up on waivers and somebody could have just claimed him. No waivers for veterans. He was just a free agent, and I'm sure the Browns worked it out, and now D'Onta Foreman is back. The Browns will keep 3 quarterbacks on the roster when we get to the start of the season, unless something bizarre happens. I never thought they would move on from DTR. I certainly never thought they'd move on from Jameis Winston. I could not believe there were some rumblings about the Browns potentially trading Jameis Winston. I know Mary Kay Cabot, who reported something about it earlier, clarified and said, they're willing to listen. And as an NFL GM, you would be derelict in your duties to not consider anything. You got to be open-minded to a phone call about any player on your team. Listening can't hurt. There's no downside to listening to an offer for any player, even if it's a player that you would not trade or would be very unlikely to trade. It never made sense to move on from Jameis Winston, and they are not doing that. Jameis is what they were missing last year until they signed Joe Flacco, a veteran quarterback who, if Deshaun Watson gets hurt, can keep the team afloat. Now, ultimately, You can't win a Super Bowl with Joe Flacco. You can't win a Super Bowl with Jameis Winston, in my opinion. But he can keep the team afloat until if Deshaun Watson does get hurt, until he's able to come back. Hopefully that won't be an issue this year. If the Browns are lucky, if we're all lucky, if Deshaun Watson is lucky to some degree, because some of it can be prevented, I guess, on some level, but ultimately, it can't be completely helped. Guys are going to get injured. It's going to happen. But hopefully Deshaun Watson will play 17 full games this year, and we don't see Jameis Winston at all, and we don't see DTR at all, and certainly don't go to the fourth and fifth quarterbacks that we saw from the Browns last season. The Browns were crushed by injuries on the offensive side. They were pretty healthy and lucky on the defensive side. We'll see what happens this year. Heading into the season, it looks like the Browns are a fairly healthy team. Obviously, Nick Chubb starts on the PUP list, but we knew that was coming. Obviously, it's not anything that happened this year. It's still recovery from last year. But the team is, and we don't know about Jedrick Will's status because he hasn't practiced yet. So he's not looking great for opening day. Besides that, I mean, everybody that you thought had a chance to start on opening day still has a chance. I don't know if I'm freezing up here or what. I see on my screen, it looks like I've frozen up a couple of times. I hope that's not happening. I have no idea. But we'll just keep going. But hopefully we're not breaking up here. But in terms of what else the Browns might do here with the roster in the next week, I think it is entirely possible that they add another tight end. They did pick up a tight end, a guy I never heard of before. I think his last name is Whitehead or Whitehood, or I don't. But anyway, they picked him up to the practice squad, so I don't know that that's the answer, but it is potentially telling if ultimately the Browns just stick with two tight ends on the roster that the Browns are really changing the offense. Last year, we had heard that the offense was going to be very different, and it wasn't. And I think, Kevin, I was talking about this earlier today. Kevin Stefanski, as much as I love him, I at least got to give him a tiny bit of the blame for trying to fit Deshaun Watson into a system that probably doesn't work for him. I think a lot of us got caught up in, wow, Joe Flacco, he looked great, and the system fit him perfectly. And this system clearly that the Browns have been running the last couple of years did not fit Deshaun Watson's skill set perfectly. Now, I ultimately will not blame Stefanski much because on some level, the quarterback's got to be able to adjust, and it seems like it didn't happen, and it seems like it came real easy for Joe Flacco, who had been on the couch for months and months. But and also the fact that I think Kevin Stefanski truly felt that Deshaun Watson could thrive in the system he likes running, and he basically the first year he blew it off because he was suspended for 11 games, didn't have enough time to work. And last year, I think he kind of looked at it as, okay, this is our first year doing it. It again didn't really work. And I think that either he individually or the organization as a whole felt like, okay, we need to get back, run RPOs, have Deshaun Watson in shotgun. To me, the best coaches will adjust what they do to the talent around them. And the last 2 years, you could argue that the Browns didn't do a great job of that. Now, it's hard to be too critical of Kevin Stefanski. Some people can say, well, the guy won Coach of the Year, and nobody wants to give Deshaun Watson the benefit of the doubt. And I've been pretty hard on Deshaun Watson myself. But ultimately, it was time to make a change to what you were doing offensively. And I'll be very curious to see if once the season starts, will there be a noticeable difference in the offense? Will it become more pass first? Will it become a lot more shotgun? And one of the signs that maybe that's the case is the fact that they only have two tight ends on the active roster. Kevin Stefanski has loved a heavy tight end personnel sets, 12 personnel, 13 personnel, where you have two or three tight ends on the field. And now, obviously, it's not an option. Well, two is still an option because you have two tight ends, but you don't have a third. And the Browns use 3 tight ends a lot in the last couple of years, and clearly they're diminishing they're telling you, hey, the depth at that position is not as important as it used to be. They didn't bring in a legitimate third tight end that's the guy who's played in the league. They cut the guys who were competing for the potential spot. And as of now, they have one guy you never heard of on the practice squad, and that's it. The Browns have, I believe, now filled 15 of their 16 practice squad spots, including Mike Ford. Mentioned Mike Ford. There was a report by Mary Kay that Mike Ford was coming back. It hadn't been announced by the team, but it did get announced today. So Mike Ford is going to return. He's probably Mike Ford, Michael Woods, Justin Hardy. These are some guys who are on the practice squad that we could very well see as the season goes along. Veteran players. Well, in Ford's case and in Hardy's case, they're veteran players. Special teams guys. Mike Ford can also play corner, and that makes him certainly more valuable than being just a special teams player because he's able to do some other things. So ultimately, I don't think the Browns are going to add another tight end to the active roster. And the 53-man that you have right now could very well be the same roster you have, once we get to opening day. Obviously, there's some possibilities. Who knows what they may or may not be working on. We know Mike Hall Jr. will not be there. He's on the commissioner's exempt list. He could come off that at any time, depending on what the league decides to do. But I can't imagine they would just put him on it, 2 days ago and take him off before the first game. But eventually, he will come off the commissioner's exempt list, and the Browns will have to create a roster spot. But like I said, it's possible that the 53 they got right now is at least the 53 starting the season in week 1. And as we dive more into the week 1 matchup, I think the way you look at this game right now, it does feel like a game that could be very low scoring. Remember last year was bad weather, but and that obviously played a role, and Joe Burrow was banged up, and Watson had barely played, and it was an ugly game, a defensive game, and the Browns defense dominated the opener last year at home against the Bengals. The Browns are going to try to win the same way. I mean, Deshaun Watson has not played at all. There's some issues on the offensive line. Dallas has got a good pass rush. On the other side, Dallas has got 2 rookies starting on the offensive line. The Browns obviously have a fantastic pass rush. The Cowboys, until proven otherwise, I don't trust their running game at all. They got Dak Prescott, who's great, CeeDee Lamb, who's great, Brandon Cooks, nice second receiver. They got a good tight end in Ferguson, who had a nice year last year. But they don't have a great offensive line, as I mentioned, 2 rookies, and their running back situation. I mean, they had Dalvin Cook to Ezekiel Elliott, and they do have a couple of young guys there, but nobody that's really stood out at all. And I don't understand what the point is of bringing Dalvin. Like, what did he? Jerry Jones, he's such a dope. I don't understand this guy. You're an owner. Why don't you hire a GM and let them do their job? Now, I can't say he's been the worst GM ever. He's drafted a number of good players, but it's stupid things like this. What are you bringing in Dalvin Cook? You already have a washed-up old back in Zeke Elliott. Like, what are they going to do with Dalvin Cook? That guy's shot. Wasn't it clear enough last year? I don't understand what some of these owners, they're too involved with the team. I guess if I were an owner, if I was some rich jerk billionaire, and I don't know. Jeez, I got an itchy nose here. Can't stop scratching. I guess if I was, filthy rich, maybe I'd be a pain in the butt too. I just I think when the owner meddles too much, it's a negative. And Jerry Jones is just, what have they won since he's been there? You won off Jimmy Johnson's back when you first got there, and you haven't won squat since. Also interesting. We was talking earlier today with I can't think of his last name. His first name is Marcus. He does the Locked On Cowboys podcast, and he was saying that in terms of the contract, obviously the Cowboys just gave CeeDee Lamb a new contract. And I asked him about Dak Prescott and what's going on there, because Dak is set to be a free agent at the end of the year. The Cowboys can't franchise tag him. He says that the Cowboys would sign him today, that they would be willing to go over $60 million a year on Dak Prescott. It's Dak that doesn't want to sign a contract right now, because for whatever reason, Dak wants to get to free agency, or maybe unless the Cowboys just go bananas in their offer, I don't know. But if I'm Dak Prescott, I'm with him, man. If I'm Dak, I'm like, I want to get the hell out of Dallas. The Dallas Cowboy fans are the worst. They are the worst. They're bandwagon fans. There's a ton of them, because there's a bunch of people my age that the Cowboys were great. My age or a little younger. The Cowboys were great there with Aikman and Irvin and Emmett and all the great players they got in the Herschel Walker trade. And all these fans all over the country jumped on the bandwagon. They declared themselves America's team. They're not America's team. Most of America hate. I mean, I guess it's like the Yankees, where the most popular team and also the most hated team. And like the Yankees, not as the Cowboys have been worse, but the Yankees haven't done much winning at the high. The Yankees have been a great regular season team, and they flopped in the playoffs for much of the last couple of decades. Now, at least they have won they've won a lot more World Series more recently than the Cowboys have, but well, not a lot, but they've won. Yeah, well, yeah, I was fair the first time with a lot, but the Cowboys haven't won obviously in forever. But their fans are so obnoxious. They have a high percentage of bandwagon fans, and I know so many Cowboy fans that are constantly shitting on Dak Prescott, and to me, that's completely ridiculous. I just don't get that at all. I think the guy's the most underrated quarterback in the NFL. He's without a doubt top 10. He's had a couple bad moments. I'll give you that in the playoffs. But a number of their playoff failures have not been his fault. It's been because of their defense or their awful coach or whatever, a variety of reasons. I'm not completely giving him a pass. I'm just saying he's played great for the most part when he's been in Dallas. Anyway, I know I've made the point of saying that the Browns should go after him next year if he's a free agent if Deshaun has a bad year. And I know that's probably not realistic because of the money, although Jimmy Haslam has shown time and time again he has no fear. And the one thing about Jimmy is, there's a lot of negative there, but when it comes to Jimmy, he is not afraid to spend money. Not at all. So I don't think, again, it's probably not going to happen. It's a pipe dream. I should let it go. Hopefully we don't need it to happen, because hopefully Deshaun Watson will bounce back this year. But if he doesn't, man, and the Browns, what do you call it? What's the word I'm looking for? Not extended Deshaun Watson. I can't think of the word. They adjusted his contract. I'll say adjusted because I can't think of the word I'm looking for. Restructured. That's it. Knew it. They restructured his contract to basically kick the can down the road. And they have a ton of money not only in 2025, 2026, now 2027 has gone way up to $28 million they're going to owe him, which he doesn't even have a contract for that year. And 2028, there's some money on the books for that year now too, because of the restructure that they did. They lowered their cap a ton. The Browns, believe it or not. So if you look at money spent this year, actual money that they got to pay out this year, the Browns are second in terms of money spent. And yet they have now, because of this restructure with Watson, because his contract's so big, the Browns have the most cap space in the league, which is crazy because they're spending so much. But when you keep restructuring contracts, and they've done it with a ton of guys, and obviously with Watson's contract being the biggest, that was opened a ton of space. Because of that, now the Browns have the most cap space, even though they're spending the most money. Jay says, "What's up, Bull? Howard Stern back next week. I'm excited about the Browns." Listen, I've always been a big Howard Stern fan. And his interviews are still great. I don't love him as much as I used to, but there's no denying the man's the greatest to ever do it in this business. And I used to obsessively listen to Howard Stern when I was in my 20s. When I was working, I was a gopher at an oil company before I went back. So I dropped out of college and was working different jobs. And when I was 22, 23 years old, I was working for an oil company in Brooklyn, New York. And I was the gopher, basically. I'd go to the bank, I'd go to the post office, do all these odd jobs that needed to get done. And I had my routine down pat because Howard Stern in those days was on regular radio, and he'd go, unlike any other radio show, he would go 30, 40, 50 minutes, even an hour. Most radio stations, you never go more than 15 minutes, 20 maybe. He'd go forever, but then he'd take commercial breaks, and they'd be like 10 minutes or 12 minutes or whatever they were. That's at least how I recollect it. And I would plan all my duties around that. Like, as soon as he went to commercial break, I'd run into the bank. Then I'd run into the post office, which was like right next door. So I wouldn't miss a minute. But the one thing that irks me about Howard now is he and I didn't care about this when I was a kid, but he kind of brags about how he never takes a day off, like he never calls in sick or anything like that. But he only works 3 days a week, and it's only for like half the year. So it's weird that he's still like, he talked about that like I don't know. It's just a weird brag when you're off the entire summer. But I still love him to this day. The rest of the people on the show are just not as good as it used to be. But anyway, enough about Howard Stern. Joshua, one more thing on Stern. I remember when traditional radio folks said it was the end of his career when he left for Sirius, which was certainly not true. Don't forget how old he is now. I get it, he's old. That's fine, but you can't brag about working every day when you don't work every day. That's all I'm saying. But he's Howard Stern, so he can do whatever the hell he wants. I'm just hoping he'll make fun of me on his show for saying this and call me an idiot, a nobody, whatever. I mean, that would be a highlight for me. So there you go. All right, let me switch gears. I want to talk some baseball. The Guardians yesterday salvaged the final game in their series with Kansas City, and this was huge. I really believe that this was a season-saving victory. Not that and maybe that's a little unfair to say because I still think the Guardians would have made the playoffs. But in terms of season-saving, I think for them to have success in the postseason, obviously the top of the lineup and the top of the rotation have to turn it around. Steven Kwan, Jose Ramirez, Josh Naylor, Tanner Bybee, and Gavin Williams. Those are their five most important players. And none of the five are playing well right now. Ramirez has been Bybee's been at best. The other three have been awful. And if those five don't play well in the postseason, then the Guardians aren't going to win anything. They're going to go home early. But in addition to that, if those guys get back on track, at least some, if not all of them, the difference could be home field advantage. The Guardians, until recently, have been much better at home. Plus, if you're the 1 or 2 seed, you have a bye in the first round of the playoffs. The Royals have the tiebreaker for if the two teams finish tied for first in the AL Central. So it looked like the Royals were about to sweep them. Going into the 7th inning, they were up. And they would have had a 1-game lead, but really it's more like a 2-game lead because of the tiebreaker. Instead, the Guardians come back, and now they're still up a game. Now, they still don't have the tiebreaker, but the Royals have to go play. The Astros have been playing very well, whereas the Guardians, and they'll play a 4-game series with the Astros. And the Guardians will be off today, and then they host the Pirates for 3. And the Pirates are playing absolutely awful baseball. They were a decent team earlier in the year. They've been hideous, though. I mean, they're probably, they're bottom 6 or 8 team in baseball right now. They've just been awful. They just got destroyed, gave up over 40 runs in a 3-game series to the Cubs, who don't have a particularly great lineup. Their bullpen's a mess, and the Guardians are going to miss their top 2 starting pitchers, Paul Skeens and Jared Jones, who went the last 2 days for the Pirates. So this is a series where the Guardians better take care of business. Now, hopefully they don't waste that great comeback win, getting some momentum for them, which I hope. But because there's no reason they shouldn't be able to sweep the Pirates. You got Bailey Falter against Ben Lively. Now, the Guardians don't have their two best starters in the series either. But Bailey Falter, Ben Lively on Friday. On Saturday, you got Luis Ortiz and Boyd. And then Brad Keller is going to go for the Pirates. Not Brad Keller. Mitch Keller is going to go for the Pirates on Sunday. The Guardians have not announced the starter yet for Sunday's game. Maybe Alex Cobb's back. But that was a huge win. I think there's 28 games left in the season for the Guardians. If the Guardians end up winning their division, I think we will look back to last night's game and say, that was it. That game got them back on track, allowed them to steady the boat as they're collapsing here, steady the ship, and prevent them from falling into second place. I know technically they were in second place when they were tied because of the tiebreaker, but they were still tied in the standings, and they were 9 outs away from being in second place by themselves. It didn't happen. They came back and won, and now there's an opportunity this weekend to increase the lead before they go to Kansas City, hopefully play a lot better than they did in Cleveland against the Royals next week. So that'll be huge. Tony says, get the division and get back on track with almost 30 games left. I mentioned there's 28 exactly. See what happens in October. That's right. And the Guardians could still, if you look at the standings in terms of winning, having a bye, right now the Guardians, if the season ended today, the Guardians would be the 2 seed in the American League. So they would get a bye. And they would have home field advantage against anybody but the Yankees. And as bad as they've played lately, they're not far behind the Yankees. They're only 2 games back of the Yankees for the top seed. I believe the Yankees have the tiebreaker as well. So if they finish tied, the Yankees would have home field. But the Guardians are still very much alive to get at least a 2 seed in the American League, if not still the 1 if the Yankees struggle. Now, the Orioles have the second best record. The Yankees are 78-56. The Orioles are 77-57. Then the Guardians are 76-58. Then the Royals are 75-59. So all 4 of those teams are really close. But as the Guardians have lost 6 of 10. Well, in that stretch, they've only lost 2 games to the Royals in the standings and only 1 to the Yankees and Orioles in the overall standings. So there's really nobody playing. I'll tell you, the one team playing great baseball in the American League right now. The Astros have lost, did lose 6 of 9. Before that, they had been playing great. The one team playing really well right now is Detroit. They've won 6 in a row and 9 of 11 to get over 500. So the AL Central is the only division in baseball that has 4 teams over 500. The NL West, the 4th team is the Giants, and they are 500 right now. They did have 4 teams over 500, but the Giants fell back to 500. The National League Central has only 2. The National League East has 3. The American League West only has 2. And the American League East only has 3. Tampa a game under 500 and Toronto only 5 under. But this is the best American League Central we've seen in a long time. I think the Tigers got a decent chance to finish over 500. They're playing much better lately. Certainly, we know the rest of the teams are going to finish over 500. The Guardians and Royals should probably win around 90-something games. Twins might win 90. So heading into the action today, Royals a game out. Twins 3.5. They've dropped 4 in a row. They're playing lousy baseball. Ever since they won those first 2 games against the Guardians, and then the Guardians came back and won the last 2, they've been playing pretty poorly since then. I'll wrap it up with a final question about football. Joseph says, Bull, honestly, what percentage do you give Watson to return to form? Oh, man, before this year, I would have said such a high percentage. I'm going to say 50-50 right now. I can't believe I'm saying that. When they traded for him, I didn't think for a minute he would struggle here. He has. I'll say it's 50-50. He gets back to being the player he was in Houston, and that might be generous. It's got to happen this year, though. If he doesn't do it this year, and you ask me that question next year, I'm going to say 1%. But right now, I still think 50-50. I'm going to try to still be a little optimistic, although I know there's a lot of people that will think that's negative. But to me, that's optimistic. All right, thanks to everybody for joining. Thanks for everybody involved with the show. Big Z for producing today. That was Carlos Zambrano's name. I know it's Z, but we might have to go with Big Z. I kind of like that. Change the nickname up. And please hit the subscribe. Please hit the like. Help me get to 5,000 subscribers before the start of the season. We're closing in on that. I'll talk to you next time. I'll be back with a podcast on Tuesday next week. And then I will be going live after every Browns game. Soon after every Browns game, I'll be going live right here in the bullpen. We'll talk to you next time right here in the bullpen with Adam the Bull, brought to you by Bet Rivers. See you, everybody.